Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U. My name is Dove, and my friend Keith is here to bring me up to speed on everything I don't know about soccer and Arsenal. This week featured a little preseason action against FC Barcelona. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Dove. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm coming to you live from my palatial and spacious new digs.
Nice.
Like last week, I'm still surrounded by boxes, but this time they're boxes I'm going to open and unpack, as opposed to before when they're. I've attempted some decorating on an empty bookshelf for now. It won't look like this in the future, but why not?
Yeah, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so if we start with some follow-up from last week. So first of all, I had made a vague reference to a Tottenham appearance in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I dug into it a little bit more and found confirmation and specifics. So yeah, what I think tipped me off to it being Tottenham, and it was only shown briefly on screen, what tipped me off was the AIA sponsor in red on the front. I recognize that as the shirt sponsor.
Yeah,
that would a lot
do
about
it.
Shirt sponsors, and it does help for identification at longer distance.
Yep, that would do it.
So what's really funny though is I'm sure if you had seen that same thing, you might have noticed it first from the massive text behind the Tottenham player that said Son Heung-min, who is a well-known player from Tottenham, who I believe I had watched play for the Korean national team, right?
Well, and Tottenham, he played against.
Right, but I mean,
yes.
I've only seen him like once or twice as a Tottenham player. I've seen him at least as many times, if not more, and in quick succession when I was following Korea during the World Cup. So
right, and I do believe he stood out particularly because he had a mask for a facial injury.
Right, we talked about that. That's right. Yep, that too. Yep. So what was funny, and there's a link in the show notes last week, and I'll have it in the show notes this time too, is apparently there's a deeper and more troubling Tottenham connection in the Spider-Verse more broadly, which it's making me pick between Spider-Man and Arsenal, unfortunately. But apparently Son Heung-min has had other cameos because I guess Tom Holland, who's the British actor who plays Spider-Man in the most recent series of Spider-Man movies, he himself is a Tottenham fan, apparently. And so he has befriended Son Heung-min. And so he was a voice actor. He had some voice cameo in something else at some point. Mm-hmm. So this isn't his first time.
Yeah, I mean, that it happens. It's not it's not in and of itself entirely a character flaw. I mean, so there is an entire Wikipedia page, by the way, for Arsenal FC supporters, including celebrity fans, and I'll just throw out there some of the names that popped out on the actors list. Hugh Laurie was an Arsenal fan.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner. We're doing okay there. Sir Ian McKellen. So we're doing okay.
Yeah.
They can have Spider-Man. We can have Gandalf. So
I think ultimately what we need to see is a showdown between Magneto and Spider-Man. I think that's clearly what this calls for.
We'll have to flip through. Do they have the other Magneto too? But anyway.
Was it Fassbender, I think, is the young
I
Magneto?
think that was it. Yeah, he's British. He might be. Yeah. No, but Idris Elba. I'm looking at the E's and F's. There, Idris Elba, so again, Arsenal. So I feel like
we're close to an Arsenal themed Hanukkah song, like Adam Sandler about all the people who are Jewish. This person's an Arsenal fan, and so is this other person. So
yeah, no, this by the way is a massive Wikipedia page. So
okay.
I will send you. I mean, again, it's a Wikipedia page, so most of the links. There's a few on here as well that I'm like, oh, I don't want to claim him necessarily.
You take the good with the bad,
especially under the there's politicians and a few others. Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not making political statements on here. Like some of those names on here look and go, oh no, oh dear. But that can be a conversation. That can be there's our international break topic, celebrity Arsenal fans.
Oh, and which ones do we jotted down?
And certainly there are a few that are well known as Arsenal fans, and there are a handful of them that most other Arsenal fans are like, no, we'd rather you weren't.
Right.
But we can, yeah.
Yeah, so a little bit of follow-up as I was listening back to our last episode when we were talking about shirt sponsors in soccer and in Major League Baseball, and I was just kind of reflecting on it a little bit more, and I think probably the biggest thing that's different to me, the biggest reason that it bothers me seeing it on the Yankees logo and not on an Arsenal jersey, on the Yankees jersey, I mean, not logo. The sponsorships are very much integrated into soccer jerseys. And now that we've seen some international teams recently playing Arsenal, like I watched Barcelona this week, and I saw Barcelona play Madrid, and then I saw a Mexican team playing the NYCFC. Like I've seen more international teams recently, and there's a variety. Like I actually noticed that I think for Cruz Azul, I think they have sponsors on the back, but not on the front. Was interesting if I'm remembering that right. But wherever they are on pretty much every soccer team's jersey, and they're integrated. They're styled to fit in with the rest of a jersey, and even when they are the most dominant visual artifact, like they are on Arsenal's jersey, it still feels at home. Like the colors will match or whatever. That shoulder patch for the Yankees, that sleeve patch, it just looks tacked on. It looks bolted on. It looks like something you would see in Little League, not in professional sports. I don't know.
Yeah. And a lot of it, as we talked about, those in baseball and American sports, that sort of thing is very new, as opposed to European soccer teams and global soccer teams have been doing this for decades. Actually, Mexican teams, and you'll see this in some other, I don't want to say smaller leagues. Liga MX is it's actually a pretty big league, but they actually have quite a few ads all over the kits. They're kind of one of those that a lot of people look at and go, "Oh, we don't want that." No. With baseball, it's very new. And they're a bit obtrusive in part because, again, we've just never really seen that sort of thing before. Which I think is part of that.
Yeah, no, it could be. I think though, like if you looked at the tweet that I posted in the show notes last week, I think if it weren't a patch, if it were printed in navy blue that matches the color of the pinstripes, and the pinstripes just kind of, come and go around it, where it looks like it was printed on the jersey, I think it wouldn't stand out as much. It would still be noticeable enough, just like Visit Rwanda on the sleeves of Arsenal players, but it just wouldn't look tacky. I think just it being a literal patch that's stitched on, that I think is what makes it look tacky to me.
Yeah, although you can also find complaints about the way some sponsors fit onto even the kits, especially if a kit it's got like stripes or something. How the sponsor breaks it up. Yeah. Some of them they change the color, and it does. Again, it's just one of those. It's weird because we've never seen it before, and it's new and different. And
that's true.
Feels, I mean, I barely notice it exists at this point. Like I know it's there, I'm conscious that it's there, but like I don't think very much about it. So,
well, someday when I own my football club, I will make sure that all sponsors look like they are part of the jersey and that they integrate well thematically. I guess that's what
good. Good luck with that.
So. One last thread to tie up from last week is I mentioned during press demos of Apple Vision Pro that I said that they had shown a soccer match as part of a demo. They did not. They actually showed baseball and basketball demos. They did not show soccer, which was noted by one or two reviewers who point out, hey, Apple has MLS rights. Why wouldn't they have done that? But no one would doubt that it's coming when the next season comes around. After Apple Vision Pro is out, that those matches will certainly have that type of experience. Maybe they charge more for it or something, who knows, but that should be available. So I included a link last time as well as this time to Daring Fireball is an Apple-centric blog that I've read for a long time. Apple and Yankee-centric. He is a lifelong Yankees fan living in Philadelphia. So it's a great blog. And so his review, if you're curious for all his thoughts on Apple Vision Pro, read the whole thing. But the part where he talks about how sports are covered, it's a couple paragraphs all the way toward the end, because that was the last thing that they demoed. So it was the last thing they talked about. So if you're interested, there is another link again this week in the show notes. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about from this past week was I kind of had an interesting experience. It was a day or two after we recorded. I got done watching whatever show or something I was watching with my wife and or son. And when I had some time to myself. I was like, oh, you know what? NYCFC had been playing earlier. Let me watch some of that match. It was against Toronto, I think. And what I've started doing is when I'm watching. So at first it said live, but then when I went to it, it had already ended. So it was technically streaming, but all you get when it comes up is this broadcast has ended or whatever.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that'll stay on for who knows how long after it's over.
Yeah.
But so when I saw that, I decided to go back to the full replay. And what I've been doing when it's not an Arsenal game and I'm going to watch a full replay is I'll go through and I rewind it to somewhere around like the 60-minute mark or so and just kind of watch the last like half hour or so of the match. And that's been good. It's generally the most dramatic part of the match, and it kind of gives you a sense of how things ended, and you get a sense from the score at least of how it kind of went into it. So that's my compromise. If I'm watching some of it, I'll just watch like the last third or so of it. So I did that with NYCFC versus Toronto. That was interesting. And then when that was over and I went back to the TV app on the Apple TV, which kind of shows everything that you're into, they were pointing out that the U.S. women's team's World Cup game against the Netherlands was going on at that time. And that actually was still going on because they're, whatever, like 12 hours or something, 14 hours ahead of us here or something. So it was a morning game for them that was happening at night for us. And I started watching it and then changed venue. I was working on my computer for a bit. I had it on my iPad, like just kind of paying attention a little bit, but mostly doing my work. And then when I hear cheering and it's like they're about to score or something, I'll kind of look down. I realize a lot of people do generally consume sports this way.
Yeah.
It's something I haven't really done much. I'm usually focused completely on whatever I'm watching, but that's new to me. But
yeah, they are very good as background noise.
Yeah.
Especially once you get to some of these summer tournaments. That's like, I'm kind of curious what's going on, but I don't want to I have other things to do. So like, I really care how this game turns out? No. Now you're watching the US, of course. Well, okay, I care, but
yeah. So that match was going on for a while, and then when that ended and I went back to the TV app after to clean it up, get it off my list, I saw, Arsenal live, that's going on now. And so they're friendly against Barcelona, which was in LA Galaxy's stadium in Los Angeles in California in the US. That was apparently a night game starting at like 8 o'clock or so local time on the West Coast, which for me was around 11 o'clock. And I just said, screw it, I'm watching this whole game. And I did. And it was like the only time I've been the only person awake in the house watching a live Arsenal match, and that may never happen again. Or at least not for a while. So that was kind of fun. But so before we talk about the Arsenal match, I want to backtrack for a minute to the women's match. Have you watched much women's soccer?
In the past I have. It's funny you mentioned you rattled off those games. Now we didn't coordinate this, but I also watched 2 of those games. It was the last night I had in my old place before I started moving. So I watched the New York City game, which was delightful. It's the first time they've looked good in a while. Helps that Toronto stinks. I did not watch the women's game, but I did. I at that point I was up. And I said, you know what, let's do it. Let's watch the Arsenal game. So I watched the Arsenal-Barcelona game, which was fun, and as we'll talk about. I've watched the women in the past. The fact that it's in Australia, New Zealand, and the timing on it's been weird, and I haven't actually seen anything. I'm keeping an eye on it. We should also add, actually, I kind of looked this up. There are actually 14 Arsenal women scattered throughout various teams in the tournament.
Oh, cool.
So there are, including, I want to say there's 1 or 2 on the Dutch team, which is the game you watched. So, but no, I have not actually watched any of the World Cup. I know their next game is it 3 a.m. my time? You were on East Coast or something like that? Yeah, I guess they play in a couple hours from now, and that one I'm not going to do that. But good luck to them. And if there's a knockout stage game that's at a good time, maybe I'll check it out.
Well, so I was asking, have you watched much women's soccer in general? Like not even this World Cup or World Cups in general. Like have you watched the Arsenal women? Have you watched much women's soccer, or really like male focused?
I'm mostly male focused, and that's not necessarily even a comment about women's. I've watched mostly World Cups with the U.S. national team and the Olympics too, because for the men, the Olympics is kind of a youth tournament. It's not really a big deal. For the women, it's almost on par. For I think previously at some point was actually more prestigious in some ways than the World Cup. I think that's shifted. I think the World Cup is definitely, I think, a bigger deal now. But the Olympics are still pretty important for women's soccer. But I have not actually tracked the Arsenal women. I subscribe to the Arscast, their podcast series, and they do about every 2 weeks, about twice a month, they have one of their writers does a podcast about the women's team. So I have an idea of how they're doing, and I hear the names popping up. I think the games are available through the Arsenal website. You can watch some of them, or they're through either them or maybe through their league. It's not the Premier League. There's a separate league that the women have, a separate business entity that does that.
Interesting.
Which I don't remember what it is exactly, but anyway, there are ways to watch it. But again, they're good. Arsenal women are good, and US women are good, and so.
Well, the reason I ask is because for the part of this game that I did watch, which even though it was live, also turned out to be like the last third or so, which was kind of funny. I witnessed something that I don't know how common it is in women's soccer. I can say in all the men's soccer that I've watched over the last year, I've never, nor would I ever see this in a men's match. But so what happened was one of the good players from, I mean, they're all good players, but one of the better well-known players who's been in, this is her second World Cup with the U.S., Lindsey Horan. She was moving the ball down the left side of the field, and one of her club teammates, Danielle Van de Donk is her name. So one of her club teammates who's playing for the Netherlands makes a challenge and hip checks her pretty hard and knocks her down. And Lindsey Horan is pretty upset by this, to the point where after the initial challenge is issued and the free kick taken, play continues, and Lindsay is still giving this other player grief, and they're still going at it even after the initial aftermath has settled. The referee, who was also a woman, and that is one interesting thing. Do you know, in general, are the officials also women for women's games, or is it a mix of both? Do you know? I don't know that.
There are a lot of them are men. There's an effort to get more, I think, more of them in general. Although you're starting to see, the last couple of years, I've seen women as linesmen for both. Okay. I've seen them in the Premier. There's one or two in the Premier League. MLS has a couple, so they're around. I think one or two of them were in the World Cup, the last men's World Cup. But there are plenty of male referees, but I think there are also a lot of women too, more so women.
Right.
And managers, I think, are kind of a mix as well, men and women, depending on the team.
Well, so before I get to the main thrust of what I'm talking about, let me also point out that as mentioned before on the show, I don't have a TV subscription. So when I'm watching sports, well, actually, I do kind of have a shared TV subscription now. I need to keep that in mind more, but I wasn't using it when I was watching this match. I was watching it on Peacock, which is en español. They have the Spanish language streaming rights for a lot of leagues, including the World Cup.
Univision.
Yeah, so through whatever agreement, they're able to show up, but only in Spanish. So I didn't have the benefit of understanding, 90+% of what the commentators were saying. So when I describe what I saw, it is basically me interpreting based on body language on the field and not any informed commentary, except for what I've read after the fact that didn't seem to contradict. I didn't find anything contradictory to what I saw. But basically, the referee pulled the two women aside after the tussle had prolonged. They were going into a corner kick after the initial free kick. Play had continued. She kind of pulls them off to a side, and I'm imagining she's saying something like, "Okay, girls, what's going on? I'm sensing some hostility. Can you guys talk this out and kind of move past it?" I expected them to hug afterwards or something. It was just something I couldn't imagine anything at all like that happening during a men's match. It just seems like it wouldn't wouldn't go down that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're usually what you see in the men's game when guys get up and there's a hard tackle and they get up. We've seen that. We've seen in Arsenal games. There's some shoving. There's some shouting.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, you see the referees sort of step between them or pull them over. And I mean, because there's some referees are very demonstrative with their hands. You see them pointing, going, "No more,
Right.
no more."
Right.
Points saying, no more. Next time, next time, one more next time, and it's very demonstrative, very clear. I don't know. It'd be kind of, it could have been. I mean, who knows what they are even saying? As you said, their club teammates. Although we should say Daniel Van de Donk is a former Arsenal player. Since
okay,
you might recognize that name when you put it in there. It's like, wait a minute, I know her. Lindsey Horan is not a former Arsenal player, but that's okay. Right. That's okay. Yeah, it could be. Who knows? Maybe at some point they've already the conversation. By the time the referee gets over there, the conversation has already shifted, and the referee doesn't have to say. A good referee, as we sort of talked about this, kind of reads the situation and is able to does what they can to help diffuse tensions or calm things down or help manage the game. So perhaps she saw some of what was going on and said, "Okay, I don't need to make a big statement here, but let's just be clear. I'm going to tell you what's going on, but let's be clear. This doesn't need to be a big. Everybody's in trouble. Everybody's getting cards."
Yeah.
It could be. It could. I'm talking this a little blind. I didn't actually see the incident, but
sure.
But it could be that.
Yeah, I'm including. So again, like this is something that I don't see happening much with men, but there was actually an Entertainment Magazine article online talking about the scuffle between the two of them. I don't see that probably happening when two male players have a fight on the field. I don't know how much E actually covers sports. I don't remember ever finding them as being like the best hit for finding out what happened with something sports related.
Yeah, there's a handful of players I could see making their way onto E. I think the women occupy, and there's a serious point to this. The women sort of occupy a different place. Certainly, the American women do in sort of the way we talk about sports. Some of this is gendered, right? We treat women in certainly different ways than we do men sometimes, but also I think it's just there were. I don't want to say more celebrities than athletes, but there are more celebrities than, say, than the men's national team, which exists very much. I mean, you won't hear people talking about the men's national team much outside of like ESPN or a sports network,
right?
Whereas the women's national team is much more well known, almost more like their stature is very similar in that to probably some of a big name athlete from, say, the NBA,
right?
Or
that's
Major
true.
League Baseball, a well-known figure that even someone who doesn't watch sports go, "Oh, I know who that is."
Mm-hmm. Sure. I imagine part of that notoriety probably just comes from, as far as the women's game goes, I think the World Cup is really most people's exposure to women's soccer, whereas with men, I think in the U.S., the World Cup is certainly a lot bigger for a lot of people than MLS is probably, but I don't know. I feel like the women, because they've also our women have won so much. It's an extraordinarily good team.
You're overthinking this. They're really good. That's why we know them. They win constantly. They've won 4 World Cups, including the last 2.
Right.
And they nearly won the previous one before that. I mean, that's really what this is that they're good, and so it elevates them. I mean, if the U.S. men's team was, they'll never be that good. But if they were even approaching that, if they were in the kind of team that could get to that conversation of maybe winning the World Cup, we would treat them very differently. We think about them. We talk about them very differently.
Yeah.
And part of it's just like, for other sports, the international side doesn't matter as much. I mean, think about probably I'm trying to think what the comparison would be. I mean, the rest of the world doesn't play American football. There's only kind of sort of international baseball, real competition. The closest, the big thing you can think of maybe is, men's basketball in the Olympics. But the whole point is that, the mark for so many Americans is the dream team, the part where the Americans show up, win every game by 40.
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore. And it's a crisis, right? Oh my God, we lost a game fire everybody. and of course the game has changed and all of that. And it's much more competitive now, which is it's good for competition, but I still want to win everything. But yeah, I mean, their celebrity derives in large part because they're good and they win, and Americans love winners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true.
I mean, everybody does, but we really like winners.
So, you had shared a link to an article talking about a an acquisition, a transfer that Arsenal was considering. You want to tell me about that?
Yeah, this one popped up this morning. It's kind of an odd one. I mean, we're still in that season of transfers. There are rumors being floated about players that might come in. But this was an interesting one that came up this morning. The Arsenal is looking for a move for David Raya,
Hmm.
who is the keeper at Brentford. Um, we've been connected to him before. I want to say it was a couple of years ago. Our goaltending coach, Inaki Kanya, used to be Brentford's goalkeeping coach and is a big fan of Raya. Raya is a very good keeper
I
for
remember
Brentford.
him when we played Brentford.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a very good. He's a very good one for Brentford, and so the fact that Arsenal was inquiring about him, potentially bringing him in. The number there was thrown out there is Brentford wants £40 million, which it's hard for me to say. It's interesting though because I mean Arsenal has at this point a clear number one, Aaron Ramsdale, and he occupies a very important role in the club in a lot of ways. Raya might be better than him. And
Yeah.
so, and unlike say, and we started talking about this last week, like you bring in Declan Rice, defensive midfielder. Is he a replacement for Thomas Partey? You can play both of them on the field at the same time, and
Right.
you can rotate them very easily. That's much harder to do with a keeper. There's only one of them can play at any one time, and so you bring in a keeper like Raya. I mean, some way is it about putting pressure on Ramsdale? I mean, we kind of touched on this a little bit. Ramsdale was really good in his first season. He had a really strong start to the season, and then there were points in the second half of last season where, like a lot of other players on the team, he looked a little sketchy. He looked a little iffy. Some people have pointed out there's a few moments on the preseason tour where he's looked a little shaky.
Hmm.
The first goal against United doesn't look very good. He has a couple times his clearance kicks have just sailed straight out of bounds, and
Hmm.
you know Arsenal isn't looking at Raya because Ramsdale gave up a bad preseason goal. They clearly this is a guy they've been interested in for a long time, but it's a curious decision. It's accompanied by a rumor that Matt Turner was there's some interest from Nottingham Forest. Which I think would be largely good for Turner. As
Right.
much as I love that he's on Arsenal, he's also clearly Arsenal's backup. And with Champions League instead of Europa League, he's just not going to play very much. And as the US keeper, I would like to see him play regularly, which he probably will do or is more likely to do at Forest than he is at Arsenal. So,
Well, so you
um,
mentioned the Champions League. Could that
mhm.
be part of the motivation with Raya? Could we want two world class keepers and have them both play like so that they aren't either of them isn't exhausted from playing 2 matches a week?
Yeah, but the keepers are different because they don't
Yeah.
run as
Right.
much. So the exhaustion's the same. And they'll talk about this as well. Keepers can mature later in life and they can play much later in life. Like they talk about Thomas Partey, he's 30. Oh my gosh, he's 30. Like his career is almost over. Hey, keepers can play well into their late 30s. Because
Yeah.
they're not running. Their game is based on different kinds of things, and as long as they maintain that agility, that intelligence, they can play much longer. So in that sense, like you don't. I mean, yeah, there are points where maybe Ramsdale got a little tired at some points in the season, but honestly, that's not the kind of thing you have with a keeper.
Yeah.
Um, if anything, the having the backup for those cup games, like this, especially the League Cup, but also even the FA Cup, in a sense, you get to fixture congestion. You just want to rotate and change something. I mean, for the keeper, it's more about mental concentration than it is the physical activity. But even then, I mean, especially as you get later in the season, as all the games become more intense, the later if you're playing Champions League or Cup games in February, March, April, those are big games, and so it's
Right.
easier to stay mentally focused as opposed to like it's our next to last group game. I mean, it's okay. Yeah, I want to win, but
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
um,
That makes
it's
sense.
just an interesting one. Kind of curious what it might say about Ramsdale's plays. I don't know. We could be. I mean, Arteta likes competition at as many positions as possible. This will certainly push Ramsdale. I mean, but you know, it's an interesting one. It kind of popped up and this sort of
Right.
is the topic du jour for a lot of the Arsenal universe. So
Yeah. Well, and I guess if you're paying a lot of money to bring someone in, it wouldn't just be like just in case Ramsdale gets hurt or something like that. It wouldn't be a contingency when you're talking about a top tier player like that.
Yeah, 40 million is a lot
Yeah.
for a backup keeper.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And you know, and we still have some players we need to sell. Arteta's made the comment, and Adu's commented that the squad's a little big. You know, we said we have 30 players on the roster, and 30 guys don't play in a season.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
once you turn into Chelsea.
Let's not hope for that. So, something else that happened this week is, as I've been talking to other people at my job, I've found at least 2 other Arsenal fans, and one of them decided it would be fun for our company to participate in the EPL, your English Premier League Fantasy League. So this is 0 cost to join, and as far as I can tell, nothing is at stake other than bragging rights. So it was fun. They give you a budget of like £100 million or something. I forget. Maybe it's more than that. I don't remember. But they give you a budget and the full roster of all the teams that are in the Premier League and how much each of them would cost you, and then just some basic overall stats and stuff like that. When I completed my first pass at a roster, I had of my 11 play. Well, I think it might actually be more of an 11 players because you have some substitutes, but whatever, like 13, 14 players. I think maybe 7 or 8 of them were Arsenal players. Naturally, those are the players who I'm going to pick first. And I had to keep on getting rid of them one by one until I satisfied it enough that it didn't tell me that I had too many Arsenal players on the squad. So apparently it looks like there's a limit of like 3 from any one team is the limit. So do you want to go through? I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on who I picked to fill out my roster, if that's something you think might be fun to go through.
I mean, I'll say this. I don't do a lot of fantasy sports, and I've never quite played any of the EPL fantasy league. So I'm not really sure quite how they do it.
Yeah,
I've played like baseball, and baseball's a very statistics heavy sport.
Sure.
Every discrete action in the game is a statistic. So, in that sense, that one's kind of easy. Like, I played fantasy football before, and again, there's a lot of statistics. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of curious. My question for you is, like, do they talk about, like, what are they tracking? Like, what are the stats they're gathering for your game?
Well, so it will start along with game week 1 beginning on August 11th. As far as like any given player, like if I just pull up, so one of the Arsenal players on my team is naturally Martinelli. If you look at the stats that they show for him, so there's form, which is 0 right now, which it's 0 for everybody because the season hasn't started yet. So form, it explains, is a player's average score per match calculated from all matches played by his club in the last 30 days.
Okay.
So I guess they're just going by the goal average.
I'm going to guess there's a score that gets, because there are like, I'm guessing there are like player ratings, that go along with games. So basically, they'll judge how well a player did. Usually, it's on a scale of 1 to 10, and I wonder if that's like the scale they're talking about in terms of judging a player's abilities. I mean, the term you see is form, and we may have touched on this a little bit. Form generally refers to how well someone's playing, right. So they're in good form, and so it's a way, I think, probably using their game rating scores to sort of judge how well is an average of the last few games. So judging how well they've done for the last few, for I guess the last month, I think you said was the 30 days is the game.
Yeah. So I'm looking at this a little bit more, and I mean, so I'll update. I'll update you maybe every so often as we see how my team does. But basically, it looks like they distill everything down to a number of points.
Right.
And that comes so goals scored factors heavily in there. And I'm seeing for Martinelli last season, he had 15 goals scored and 9 assists. So they show a whole bunch of other stats. I don't know how many of them directly contribute, but they also give him a score. He has an ICT index, which is influence, creativity, and threat. Those are 3 things that are really interesting being grouped together like that. But But yeah, so he's like number 5 out of the 259 players in his cohort, which I guess is the whole league, or maybe all the strikers in the league.
Yeah, 250 sounds like the league, or maybe
Yeah,
all the
so
players that. Yeah, I mean, because you think about they have. Well, I guess it's 250 divided by 10 is 25. You have 20 teams. Yeah, that sounds like about. I mean, because what you're going to have is they're not going to make accessible every player, because the bottom of these rosters is a bunch of guys who will never play or kind of rotate in and out of the bench based on the game week and who's hurt and whatnot. But you're drawing from the play, the guys who play regularly. I guess what was curious to me about that, and it make looking at your roster, this is what I thought, but it also makes sense to me when you describe it that way, is the idea of the budget. And so my guess is that some of your coworkers can have rosters, I can have some of these same players on their roster. Is that?
yes.
Yeah.
So there are apparently 2 modes. There's fantasy and fantasy draft. So the person who set this up at my job set up a fantasy league, not a fantasy draft league. So we can all have Erling Haaland if we want to.
Yeah. Gosh, it's probably worth a lot of points.
Yes,
worth a lot of money
he's also by far the most expensive player, and I did not choose him because if I can only win because of him, I don't want to win.
Fair, that's fair. No, but it's because it's interesting, because the one game that when I've played fantasy, it's usually what they're calling the draft, which is that obviously everyone, once someone picks a player, nobody else can have him because you're building your roster based on that. And so, but I mean, I was looking at your roster. You have the picture here of it. I'm looking at it going, yeah, that's you. How did you get all those guys? Are there 3 people in your league? I'm not, yes. I mean, I did have that. I played in a fantasy league, a baseball league. And,
yes, there are 3 other people.
Oh, okay.
It turns out.
Well,
that is not the reason.
Yeah. I played when I was in high school. I did a fantasy baseball league with there were 4 of us, so our rosters were stacked. But because of course you have 4 of you picking anyone you want from Major League Baseball. Right. So, but yeah, interesting. The budget makes sense. I guess I could see that as another way to make that.
Yeah, so just going through it real quickly for the listeners. So the Arsenal players who I employed are Ramsdale and keeper, Jesus and Martinelli. And it's also kind of funny seeing all these players that I definitely think of as forwards, that I think of as strikers, being listed as midfielders, and Martinelli is among them. Which also led to some of my choices too, which is kind of interesting, because you need 2 forwards, 4 midfielders, 4 defenders, and then your keeper, and then you have 1 backup, 1 substitute for each of those positions.
4-4-2, baby.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so Ramsdale, Martinelli, and Jesus are my Arsenal players, and then I was just kind of scrolling through, sorted by how good they were in descending order, so the best players at the top of the list, and just kind of picking, okay, so who of these players do I remember? Have I heard of, and I remember their names and remember them being good and didn't bother me in some fundamental way, like some of my choices did. Some of my options, I should say. So, it was Harry Stones, I think, is his first name.
It's John Stones.
John Stones? Okay, yep. I'll probably stop guessing for the ones that I don't know for sure. So John Stones, I think he is one of 3 City players that I have.
Yeah, I see 3 City players.
Yeah. So Stones, De Bruyne, and Julian Alvarez. That was a clear choice because I remember him from the World Cup as well as from Manchester City. So
of course he's a backup at City because he plays with Erling Haaland.
Right. Yeah. So was Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Jesus was a forward, but he was more of a wide player. But he left and Haaland came in. So
okay. I didn't know that they didn't overlap. I didn't know that Haaland was that recent of player.
Yeah, it was only his first year in Manchester.
Wow. So. That makes that even crazier.
Now he has a full year under his belt. We're all screwed. We're all screwed, man.
Speaking of which, we just watched Die Hard 2 this weekend. So I read the storybook I have of Die Hard 1, and that reminds me of Erling Haaland every time I see those blonde robbers from Die Hard now. But anyways, so then the other players in no particular order that I picked, I guess there's is it Trent Alexander-Arnold? I feel like that's the first name I remembered right. Yep. Yeah. Shaw, I'm not going to guess, from Wolves. And Dunk, I remembered that name from I'm blanking on the team. Brighton.
Yeah.
Dunk from Brighton. Marcus Rashford, I do like him. That was one that I was like, yeah, I want Rashford on my team. Like, if I can't populate myself with like all Arsenal players, like Rashford is the one United player I think who I have on here.
He's a goal scorer and a fairly likable guy, all things considered.
Yeah. So, and then I really was at a loss to try and pick my last starter. And I'm looking through the list and I see a player who I absolutely did not remember from when we played Everton. For all I know, he was not on their team at that point in time, but his last name is my son's first name, Reed. It's like, okay, sure. Okay. I'll put Reed on my team.
Okay.
And then for backups, I have Cody Gakpo, Caicedo, Andrew Robertson. I don't honestly know that I remember him. And
he's a defender, so he's generally a little more anonymous. Actually, he and Kieran Tierney are both Scottish internationals, so they're Scotland is Robertson, Tierney, and then like the rest of their roster.
Yeah.
There.
And then my backup keeper was another one where like, okay, no, I know I want Martinez. Like he's a good keeper. I like him. I've seen him play. I remember him, and I think so. He played for Argentina also, right?
Yes, he was Argentina's keeper. The former Arsenal man,
right.
Also gifted us a goal off the back of his head. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So that was all. That's it. So we'll see how they do. So I named my team Q Branch. And the James Bond connection, and I'm the IT guy in this fantasy league within my company, so I figured Q Branch would be thematically appropriate on multiple levels.
There you go.
I got to design our kit. You just kind of pick like the colors of the shirt fronts and shirt sleeves, and whether or not you have stripes or hoops or whatever on the jerseys and the socks. So I just kind of went with it, kind of looking like a James Bond tuxedo, like a white shirt front, black sleeves, black shorts, and black socks.
There we go.
So, yeah. So, we'll see how that goes. This will be interesting. This is going to be my first time doing any fantasy sports at all or anything even resembling it. So, so in just a minute, we have sponsorship that is coming up. However, I want to let you know, if you find yourself not appreciating hearing our sponsorships as we go on, I will remind you that we have our Gooner U Superfan membership. You can join. There's a link in the show notes of every episode. If you do become a superfan, starting this season, starting with the last episode, I am putting up ad-free versions of each episode. So you won't even need to try skipping the ads. They will just magically disappear. So if that's something that sounds interesting, it's only $1 a month. I'll remind you at the end of the episode. We do really appreciate it because that'll help keep us going. I'll make sure that we keep the lights on and are able to keep Gooner U open for new enrollees. So with that in mind, I would love to tell you about our friends at Zencastr. So Zencastr is the platform that we are using as we speak for recording this show. It is one that we've used from, I believe, the beginning of the show. That we had a brief period where we switched away to something else for a little bit, but quickly went back because overall it's a better product and we like it more. Zencastr is podcasting made easy. It has a lot of great things about it. One thing that I forgot to highlight last time is how easy it makes it to connect multiple people together, especially let's say you want to start a show where you have guests and you have a rotating lineup of guests. Let's say you want to do an interview show or something. You have different people joining all the time. Just give them a link. I mean, this is how Keith joins every week. He just opens up a link and he's in, and that's it. Aside from any hardware concerns, which, for a lot of shows that people may not care as much as I'm burdened with caring. But it takes care of all the software for you. Someone just needs to click the link, come in, and the host takes care of everything else and gets high quality recordings that are recorded locally and then uploaded after the fact. So you get full quality video and audio for all participants. And it has a full suite of editing tools that will put a nicely polished post-production together for you after the fact too. So it's a really great tool. We really enjoy using it. You should go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Gooner, Gooner. There is no U in Gooner, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any paid Zencastr plan. I want you to have the same easy experience as we do for all of our podcasting needs. So it's time to share your story. Again, that is zencastr.com/pricing and use code Gooner, and that will get you 30% off. You can also follow the link in our show notes or description on YouTube, and that will also apply that code automatically for you. So thanks again to Zencastr. So we talked a little bit before the beginning of the episode, before we started recording, about what we're going to talk about this week in the absence of any material matches. I do want to briefly touch on Barcelona, but I think other than that, we'll maybe start getting to some of the questions that are kind of back burner questions, not super important to understanding the key events of any given match, but I've kind of accumulated a bunch of those over the last several games, probably even more than that. And maybe we can clear the decks a little bit. So first with Barcelona, did you watch the entire match? What did you watch with that?
Oh yeah, I had it on. I mean, at a certain point, it is, it was sort of like you did. I had some other things to do, so there was a lot of the game acts as background noise. But
yeah.
But yes, I stayed up for the whole thing, which was something of a mistake because I actually needed to get some sleep. But you know what? We beat Barcelona, which was nice.
Oh yeah, so it was good seeing. I'm guessing we're going to be playing against them in the Champions League, right?
Possibly. We'll wait and see
at some point. Maybe
the draw. Well, I mean, historically, yes, we're almost certainly going to play them or Bayern Munich because we always play them or Bayern Munich. But yeah, at some point, and actually, I'm gonna stall a little bit while I look this up. At some point, we'll get the draw for the group, which I imagine will be in probably late August. Yes, the draw is August 31st, so a month from now. They're doing qualifying rounds now. In fact, the let's see. Oh yes, the second leg of the second qualifying round will be starting tomorrow, Tuesday, August 1st. There's still a third qualifying round and then a playoff round, and then the group stage will draw on the 31st and will start in mid to late the 19th and 20th of September.
Okay.
The short version is, we'll talk about the draw closer. Yes, being drawn with Barcelona is a possibility.
Sure.
And so we basically have a 1 in 7 chance of that happening.
Okay. Well, so in a larger sense, though, we are competing in the same league as them in the Champions League. And, this is my first time now following Champions League level competition as part of my duties on this show, part of the great burden of following soccer as closely as I have been, even when we're not doing our show. It's crazy to me. If you told me a year ago that when I have free time, I just turn on a soccer match for a team I've never heard of before, never watched before, which I've been doing lately, I would have thought you were crazy. I would have
straight called you into your veins. Yeah. Just
so anyways, what was really encouraging. So I'd watched this match. I saw us kick their butts, and it was really fun to watch. We did a great job. It was a great performance. Then this weekend, Real Madrid had a friendly against Barcelona. This was in AT&T Stadium, which I've seen in the distance every time I visit my parents. You can see it from the road that leads to their house. I was kind of interested just from that reason, okay, well, this is a match that's going on, where they live. And these are two teams that are world-class teams that I'm interested in. And yeah. And so, like I was saying, I've done before, I watched the last third or so of the match. And it was actually funny. We were eating out, and I think the match was going on live. This was not Buffalo Wild Wings. I didn't have a clear view to watch the entire match or anything. But as I was going to the bathroom, walking past a bar, they had it on. They always have sports and largely soccer because it's a Mexican place. So there's always soccer on whenever there is soccer on. So I saw a little bit of it there that reminded me that it was going on. And then later on, I watched it, and I was really pleased to see that they beat Real Madrid and we beat them. Therefore, we have a shot at potentially maybe actually being better than two Champions League teams in the preseason, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I mean, there's two caveats to that. One, of course, as we've talked about, it's preseason, right. And it's hard. I mean, so yes, it was a lot of fun to beat up Barcelona, and there was a part of me that was excited to see how well we played because Barcelona. We played Manchester United. I know we can play well against Manchester United. I saw it. We talked about. We played well at Old Trafford, kind of feel a little hard done by in the loss, and then we played really well and beat them in the game with the Emirates. So I'm not worried about how we look against United. I don't, who cares how we look against the MLS All Stars, because it's not really a measuring stick of any. There's no way you can use that as a measuring stick. But
Sure.
Barcelona's a little different, right, because of their talent. Now, the caveat, of course, being preseason, it was their first preseason game,
Oh,
so they're
okay.
definitely a little bit behind where we were in terms of development and ramping up. The other one to watch out for is it's especially prominent in the U.S. with college football, but also generally works in any sports. The transitive property. Team X beat Team Y, and we beat Team X. Therefore, we would beat Team Y. No, that is not how
Right.
that works. That never works that way. And again, who knows where Real Madrid is as far as their preparation, and
Uh-huh.
Barcelona as well. But I have to say again, it was good. And looking in Barcelona, rolled out some players who are going to play, starters like we did, guys who are going to play in those kind of matchups. And, at least their first two goals, and to some extent their last one, came against the run of play. So we didn't just score a bunch of goals. We played very well, which was
Hmm.
nice to see for a squad of that caliber. How does that look when the games are for real? We're gonna find out.
Right.
But yeah, it'll be. It's one of those. I felt better. I felt better after this one and the way it played out than I did. Obviously, it didn't feel good to lose to United, but who cares? I feel better about this one than I sort of did about some previous performances in the preseason, which is good because that means we're ramping up. We're getting ready to get to the games that count, and
Hmm.
that's ultimately the goal, is that we're ready to go
Sure.
when it matters.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to tell you something funny too. That talking about that time in the Mexican restaurant when we saw those two teams playing briefly reminded me of another conversation. So I had told my son, because his jersey doesn't have anyone's name on it, and
Mhm.
I forget if we talked about it on the show. I know you and I talked about it either on the air or off the air, but um, I didn't. First of all, I couldn't find a place that would, because I was getting late in the season. I couldn't find a place that would actually put a player name and have his size, like for a kid's jersey, all at the same time. But regardless, I didn't even really feel bad about it because he doesn't have a favorite player yet. He
Yeah,
would have wanted the player that was on mine, which isn't really his favorite player. And so,
yeah.
what I told him at the time is if he watches Arsenal play with me, when we do get him a new jersey when he wants one for this season or next season, whenever it works out to be, that he can pick which player he wants on the back if he actually has his own favorite player. So we were talking this at this meal, and I asked him, so are you looking forward to watching these matches with me so you can pick out your favorite player? And he told me he already has a favorite player. I said, oh, really? And I'm thinking he's going to say like Saka, because he had mentioned before when we were at the match last weekend against Manchester United, he mentioned that he liked Saka. And I'm figuring he's going to say Saka, who I've also mentioned that my dad likes. That's who he's a fan of on the team, or Martinelli, who I like. He says his favorite player is the one who makes a mess. And I'm thinking about it for a second. And I'm like, oh, he means Messi.
Yeah.
My 6-year-old son thinks that Lionel is a Messi player.
Yeah. He is filthy, and depending on how you use that word.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone was in that Miami game where they were drenched from
Oh yeah,
sweat.
well
But
that yeah, but
by the way, while I'm thinking of Miami, we mentioned that they were an expansion team and that Beckham has, I don't know if he's the owner or an owner or what that
he's
situation
part of the
is.
ownership group.
But yeah, I noticed, I was looking at their crest in the Apple TV app, and
Mm.
they were only founded in 2022. Was I reading the
Yes,
Roman
no,
numerals correctly?
they were 2020. Their first season was the COVID year.
Oh, okay. Because I thought that I had seen like MM XXII. I thought that I saw the Roman numerals for 2022 on there. Maybe
No,
I was reading it
I'm
wrong.
just looking it up. It's MMXX, so it's
Oh,
2020.
okay.
Yeah, no, they're still relatively new, but they
Yeah.
had them and who else came in that year? Someone else came in. Their first season was COVID. They played 3 games and then the season the whole team shut down.
Right.
League shut down for a month while everybody figured out what they were doing.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So Moving on to this list of questions that I've had for a while. So the one at the top of the list is something that I wonder every time I'm watching a match. So we see the coaching staff on the bench. We see Arteta. We all know who Arteta is. He doesn't wear, because he's the manager, he doesn't wear the training gear like everyone else, all the other staff does that has the team's name on it.
Mm.
But everyone else on the coaching and support staff, they all have their initials on their stuff, which is cool. And I've seen actually for the players themselves too, like if they have a jacket that they have for when they're on the sidelines or whatever, that has their initials and stuff, which is cool. You know, it makes sense. Who is AFS? It seems like if I had to guess, he's the assistant coach or something, but what is his name and what is his role on the team? He's always talking to Arteta.
Yeah, so that's the AFS is Albert Stuvenberg. Stuvenberg, I don't know. I think it's Dutch. I don't know how you pronounce it, but Albert Stuvenberg. I assume the F is his middle name. He is the assistant manager, so he's definitely Arteta's right hand.
Okay.
His number two guy. Um, so definitely, yeah, definitely the most prominent of the assistants there.
Right. Okay. Cool. So the next thing that I was thinking about, and I don't remember if this dates back to the World Cup or if it's just because of the large number of Brazilian players that we have on our team. I was just wondering. So it seems like from when we're talking about World Cup, Brazil has the largest number of like good players like internationally. It's just like they just produce tons and tons of really good players.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that the Premier League is still the biggest league with arguably the best teams? Like, why is it that no one really talks about, or at least I haven't heard people talking about watching Brazil who don't live in Brazil, like watching their national league?
Yeah, the big reason is money, and that goes for Europe in general. So if you go back to and guys will talk about this, sort of the first real heyday of the Brazilian national team is in the '60s, building up to ultimately 1970, and their World Cup team is this 1970 Brazil is generally considered one of, if not the greatest, World Cup teams ever. Um, and basically there was this talk that like because I mean you don't have satellites yet, so there's not a lot, you don't have transatlantic television. There was something of a mystery to the South American players because they played in South America, the Europeans played in Europe, and the World Cup's the only time they ever really see each other.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this kind of like newness to them. Now, as that sort of changed, the European leagues, especially the biggest ones, are generally more stable. There's more money available. Both the clubs have it, but also because of television, they can sell themselves better. They're also selling to much more affluent audiences. The Europeans have larger, stronger economies. You go to Brazil. I mean, you have some of the big clubs there. You get outside some of the big clubs, and some of the facilities aren't very good. The salaries aren't very good.
Hmm.
In Europe, the leagues are, especially the top leagues, are generally just overall stronger, and so there's a great draw for a lot of South American players and players from all over the world coming to Europe. And a lot of it's language based. A lot of Latin American players wind up in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Duh. Including the Brazilians, for whom, the Portuguese, like you don't see a lot of Brazil. You don't see big name players going to the Portuguese league. It's a second tier kind of a league. But you'll see them going to Spain or to France. You'll see a lot of African players, especially West Africa, going to France, on the former French colonies, so they all speak French. You'll see that migration towards Europe because just so much more money there. And even then, it's largely, especially now there's more money. It kind of trickles down to the lower levels, and it's largely also they're more stable leagues and the more stable clubs. You mentioned in terms of like good players per capita, right? Like it seems like they have good players. France is loaded with talented players. They've done a lot of good work in the last decade or so to really develop players and build up their national player pool. But honestly, the French league outside of PSG is,
Yeah.
If you look at the rosters of the Big Five, like look at the World Cup rosters for the Big Five, you've got England. They almost all play in the Premier League. Spain, they almost all play in La Liga. Germany, they're all playing the Bundesliga. Italy, mostly in the Serie A. And look at France. I mean, they were everywhere.
Right.
Much like we talked about with the U.S., our players are all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, but because France culturally just doesn't buy into soccer the same way that England, Spain, Germany, and Italy do.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of reasons why that's the case. They produce those players, but a lot of them, there's just so much more money available, and a lot of them look for a chance to get out. And there's a reputation attached to Brazilians as well internationally. People like having Brazilians. There's a value to them. He's from Brazil. Okay, we'll pay a little extra for that. Why toll around in the second or third division in Brazil when you can be for a first division club in Croatia?
Right.
And you're now the only Brazilian there, as opposed to in Brazil, you're one of there's nothing special about being Brazilian. So
yeah, of course, yeah.
So money's the big reason.
Okay.
You go
No, it makes sense. Yeah.
And you go to Europe, go to Western Europe, and then a lot of times the facilities are better. I mean, you hear I've heard some crazy stories about like the KHL, the Russian Hockey League, and guys getting paid in bags of cash, that sort of there's a lot of kind of really sketchy stuff that, especially if you watch American sports, you would just look and think, no, why would you be okay with that? And
yeah,
it doesn't take long to get away from the first world, so to speak, even at that kind of sporting level.
Sure. All right. Maybe we have time for one or two more, depending on how long the responses take. So, so we've talked before, and you can see it even in the preseason that Arsenal's style, and I think we also have said that Manchester City shares the same style, that it is to dominate possession. We want the ball all the time on the other team's half, just relentless attempts on goal, just dominate possession the whole match. It seems to me that that's what every team would probably like to do, except maybe they're not capable of executing on that. Are there other styles where that isn't the goal? What might other styles look like?
So the most common, the short answer to your initial question is yes, that's what ideally everyone would want to do, but for so many of them are unable to do it. And of course, your goal is not to be the most aesthetically pleasing team. The goal is to win.
Right.
And so how do you use the talent available to you to put you in the best position to win? We're rarely going to play against teams that are going to try to dominate possession, partly because that's our game and we're really good at it. And in a sense, it makes sense that we develop that way. First, Pep Guardiola, when he was at Barcelona, now about 15 or so years ago, he really helped sort of develop that system through Barcelona, both as a player and then especially as a manager in their youth system, then ultimately managing the A team, the men's team there, Barcelona, developing that kind of possession style, and it has become so. It's in a lot of ways become sort of the dominant style in the game worldwide. Now, there are other modification versions of it. A lot of it tends to where you apply pressure on the pitch. Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp plays they call the Gegenpress, which I'm going to butcher the tactical details of, but basically is a much more pressure is much more about putting pressure and a much more attacking. In some ways, they're much more aggressive going forward than City or an Arsenal, which will occasionally be more deliberate. Liverpool when Klopp first showed up, the goal seemed to be to win every game 4-3, because as you push so much pressure forward, you also invite a lot of pressure going back the other way.
Right.
What we're going to tend to see a lot of, and even amongst big clubs, United did this, Spurs did this a bunch, is a style based on counter-attacking. So you're willing to cede possession to the other team, and what you do is you sit behind the ball. We talked about packing the box and sitting behind the ball. And so you're there, and the idea is eventually they will make a mistake, either a bad pass or you will have a tackle, and then you can counterattack. This was Tottenham. This is what Tottenham did, was they would sort of absorb pressure and then they would spring forward. And they had a good front line, Kane, Son, forget who the third guy, occasionally Richarlison, although not actually didn't perform very well. But, they had forwards who could take those opportunities and convert them.
Right.
But they
Okay.
weren't looking. They weren't looking to dominate possession, or weren't looking like Arsenal is to sort of, or like City does, to create opportunities. City has the ball, and it's not just about sitting on it and possession for its own sake, but using the ball and movement to find spaces to break through those defenders. Spurs was get the ball, go and try to create an opportunity, and if you miss, drop back and prepare to play defense for the next time you get the ball.
Right. Okay. Cool. So that all makes sense. Good to know. I think that'll do it for the questions backlog for now. So, what's coming up next week? We've got our first real match of the season, right?
Yeah, so Wednesday is the Emirates Cup, which is a nice little preseason friendly. We're playing Monaco. I don't know if that's actually available anywhere on TV. It's been preseason, so watch if you want. But the big one, of course, on Sunday is the Community Shield. It is we've talked about this a little bit. It's a Super Cup, traditionally played between the winner of the league previous season, the winner of the league, and the winner of the FA Cup. Since City won both of them, traditionally the runner-up in the Premier League takes that extra spot, and that's us. So, in some ways, it's a no-lose situation. You can try to take it seriously, and if you win, you get one over on City, which feels good, and it's definitely something we need to do. On the same token, if you lose, it's just the Community Shield. It's just an exhibition. No one cares.
Yeah.
Which isn't entirely wrong. So yeah, it's one of those things that really matters if you win it, and if you lose, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. So it'll be fun. It's a nice sort of curtain raiser. It's kind of a good opportunity to. It is an opportunity for us to test ourselves against a team that we think we can compete with. And so, and as we said last year, as we're getting into those games, you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if we can't beat City, we're not going to win the league. That's just what it comes down to.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking forward to that. That should be fun. But good times ahead. So yeah, looking forward to the beginning of the season proper, and then it'll be our first real match of the Premier League season. Will be the following weekend, right? Or I guess
Saturday,
midweek. Yeah. Okay.
No, Saturdays are the following Saturday is should be Forest at home, which is a nice,
cool,
nice start.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us at Gooner U. We're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and some other places, and we appreciate you subscribing to our show and sharing it with friends. If you want to listen the night we record, as well as some other goodies, you can become a Gooner U superfan, where you can download a raw, unedited recording right away, as well as now ad-free episodes and occasional bonus content. It's only $1 a month, and there's a link in the show notes to join. And thanks again to our sponsor, Zencastr. You can find them with our special link in the description. You can follow our show on Twitter at GoonerU Show for updates and ask questions. And we also do have a YouTube channel that you can find if you want to see our lovely faces instead of just hearing our lovely voices. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you will, again, be able to find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches. Bye, Keith.
Happy new season.
All right.